Now, we proceed to one of the main highlights of this two-day event. To formally introduce our keynote speaker this morning, let me call on the PES Vice President and Conference Committee Chair, who is also the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, Dr. Agham Cuevas.
Good morning. Our keynote speaker is an economist with extensive development policy, governance, and administration expertise, acquired from over 35 years of professional work as government official, non-government organization executive, economic advisor, researcher, professor, and consultant for numerous development agencies and intergovernmental organizations. A former economics professor at the University of the Philippines for 3 decades, he is presently a cabinet member of the Philippine government, serving as Secretary of the National Economic and Development Authority, a post he had previously held from 2012 to 2016. He also served as the inaugural chairperson and chief executive of the Philippine Competition Commission from 2016 to 2022. Before his initial cabinet appointment in 2012, he was Dean of the University of the Philippines School of Economics, Director and Chief Executive of the Southeast Asian Regional Center for Graduate Study and Research in Agriculture, or SHERCA, and Undersecretary of the Department of Agriculture. Before joining the UP faculty in 1987, he was a research fellow at the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii, and an economist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. He has served in various capacities in many academic and professional organizations, including President of the Philippine Economic Society, President of the Asian Society of Agricultural Economists, Secretary General of the Asia-Pacific Agricultural Policy Forum, and Advisory Council member of the American Committee on Asian Economic Studies. He has advised and consulted with numerous development agencies and multilateral institutions, including the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, OECD, ASEAN, and various United Nations agencies. As an academic, he has taught graduate and undergraduate courses in development economics, resource and environmental economics, agricultural economics, international trade, industrial economics, and applied welfare economics. He has authored and co-authored 7 books and published close to 100 academic papers and book chapters, covering wide areas of economic development, including poverty, inequality, human development, agricultural and rural development, and political economy of policy reforms in the Philippines and East Asia. He was elected a lifelong member with the title of Academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology in 2008 for his research and other scholarly work in economics. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Hawaii, an MS in agricultural economics from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and a BS in agriculture magna cum laude from the Mariano Marcos State University. Ladies and gentlemen, our keynote speaker for the 61st PES Annual Meeting and Conference, the Honorable Secretary Arsenio M. Balisacan.
Thank you, Agham, for the very kind introduction. PS President Philip Tuanyo, esteemed PS members, distinguished representatives from the private sector and development agencies, colleagues in government. I see, of course, have to acknowledge the former NEDA Secretary, Shell Habito, and Professor Nanak Akwani, SWS Founding Chairperson Mahar Mangahas, and also former PES President. Of course, we also have here other PS presidents, including Mahar Abago. I thank the Philippine Economic Society for allowing me to discuss something quite close to home, transforming the Philippine economy towards inclusive development. Where did we come from? Where are we headed? And how do we get there? Here's an outline of my presentation. I'll first cover a brief comparative review of our country's recent economic performance vis-a-vis East Asian neighbors along several dimensions of the economy. The review will cover both chronic structural issues that our economy has faced in the past few decades and transitory challenges we are facing today. I then provide an overview of the government's development blueprint for the medium term, the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, toward achieving the country's long-term vision, AmBisyon Natin 2040. Finally, I will elaborate on the ongoing reforms and policy initiatives that we are undertaking that will allow us to meet our socioeconomic goals in the coming years. The Philippines has often been characterized as the East Asian exception, initially leading, but eventually lagging behind its dynamic East Asian neighbors. The Philippine economy started to diverge from its East Asian counterparts in the 1980s, and its anemic growth during this period has been extensively researched and analyzed. This was when the Philippine economy constantly faced threats and risk from severe political instability, fiscal and debt crisis, and natural disasters. However, the 2 decades before the pandemic have shown cause for optimism. The Philippine economy showed consistently strong economic growth, averaging 4.8% in the first decade of the millennium and 6.3% in the second decade. Between 2000 and 2019, the Philippines doubled its per capita GDP, which is a pace similar to that achieved by Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. The country's strong growth rested in part on its sound macroeconomic fundamentals of comparatively low inflation, lower deficits, and lower debt as a share of GDP, improving business confidence, and enabling the country to allocate more resources toward productivity-enhancing investments and programs. However, the fiscal space considerably narrowed since 2020 when the pandemic hit our shores. The tighter fiscal space limits our ability to respond to possible shocks and highlights the importance of efficiently managing scarce government resources. We would have to be more vigilant today to prevent our country from falling back into a vicious cycle of high debt, leading to low consumption, savings, and investments, and resulting in lower output and income. Low domestic savings limits our country's ability to accumulate the necessary capital and investment needed to boost our economy's productivity. In the years before the pandemic, high savings translated into robust macroeconomic fundamentals. However, post-pandemic years saw our savings fall back to one of the lowest in the region. For robust recovery and sustained growth, the Philippine economy must raise investment significantly to match and surpass the productivity growth of its dynamic neighbors. Before 2010, our country's investment as a share of GDP were consistently one of the lowest in the region. While the past decade has seen a steady investment build-up, we have not returned to this trajectory since the pandemic. These low investments have translated into poor quality infrastructure. Our country has consistently ranked below our East Asian comparators in the infrastructure rankings of the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Reports. Poor infrastructure, in turn, affects the overall productivity of various economic activities, limiting our growth and development prospects. Where domestic savings are too low to fund the necessary investments, foreign direct investments, or FDIs, must be tapped to support capital accumulation. Though FDIs have risen relative to their historical averages, we need to do more to compete with our East Asian neighbors. We can observe on that slide that since 2009, Vietnam and Indonesia have vastly overtaken us in FDI. To catch up, we must foster a favorable business climate underpinned by enabling policy and regulatory environment. However, besides investing in physical capital, we must invest in developing our human capital as well. Before I get into this, let me offer a slight digression. It's a well-known fact of economic development that as per capita income increases, the dominance of output and employment shifts gradually from agriculture to industry, particularly manufacturing, and then to services. Recent growth in the Philippines has been mainly services-oriented, even before reaching an upper middle income status. Upper middle income economy status. Examining regional trends, however, we observe that the services sector has also become a dominant force across comparator economies. The reliance on services vis-a-vis manufacturing-oriented growth is a question that has intrigued many development scholars. One hypothesis that manufacturing-oriented growth through rapid industrialization is indispensable to economic development. This is because it creates opportunities for skilled as well as semi-skilled workers, or particularly semi-skilled workers, to find higher paying job opportunities, and for the host country or host economy to benefit from externalities in technological acquisition or adoption. Another hypothesis, however, is that contrary to expectations, labor productivity growth in services is not inferior to that in manufacturing. Looking at the percentage point contribution to overall labor productivity in the past 3 decades, we see some support for the latter hypothesis. At least for East Asian neighbors, and especially for the Philippines, we find that services played a more significant role in raising overall labor productivity than manufacturing. And for this, the World Bank has released a recent report on this issue and the importance of the services sector in the context of the current economic environment, particularly in globalization. Of course, this is not to say that manufacturing does not play a key role in development. More likely, our long-standing struggle to enable and create a more robust manufacturing sector in the past decades means that we already missed significant investment and employment opportunities. However, recent technological challenges or changes might have facilitated the growing role of services as a catalyst for development. The digital technological revolution has made services not only more efficient, but it has also increased accessibility of the market for services on a global scale. In the Philippines, service firms have outpaced manufacturing firms regarding technological adoption. This in turn translates to faster improvements in overall productivity. In a globalized world, training a highly competitive workforce is critical with the rapid emergence of new technologies, especially those that greatly enhance the productivity of our services or services sectors and augment the value added to our manufacturing sectors. However, as you may know, our indicators for education and skills show that the Philippines is severely lagging behind its East Asian neighbors or counterparts. World Bank data shows that over 90.9% of Filipino children cannot read simple text by age 10, while around 90.4% of Filipino children in school read below the minimum proficiency level. This would have cascading effects, as children lagging in primary education are much less likely to succeed in higher education levels. This gap, I don't know where I pick up that one, I think that's a World Bank graph. This gap cannot be purely explained by a lack of resources or low per capita income. Countries like Vietnam and Indonesia have similar GNI per capita, but much lower learning poverty rates, for example. We must invest in effective programs to aim or to arm our workers with the necessary skills that would allow them to maximize the opportunities opened by today's technological improvements. Efforts must include adopting the best teaching practices and models, improving the quality and quantity of education resources where it is needed, and introducing merit-based incentives for the education profession. This gap in learning poverty is likely to have been exacerbated by the pandemic. With only 4 out of every 10 Filipinos having reliable access to an internet connection, the vast majority of children would have lost schooling opportunities with prolonged lockdowns and school closures enacted during the pandemic. Various institutions have estimated the possible cost of pandemic-induced school closures. Oxford Economics predicted that severe losses in potential GDP from lost investment and consumption could reach as much as minus 1.2% by 2032 if nothing is done to address the economic scarring or the economic scarring effects of the pandemic. On the other hand, the ADB estimates a possible 2.4% decline in lifetime earnings for students due to productivity losses from prolonged school closures. These learning losses are likely to exacerbate inefficiencies in the labor markets. Those unable to keep up with online learning will likely be even more uneducated or undereducated than their peers when they enter the labor force. We must get out, or we must get our acts right in education, and we will have to find solutions to these lingering effects of the pandemic if we want to improve our labor productivity and return to high growth path for the economy, and if we wish to fully realize the opportunities from the country's demographic transition. As we know in income growth accounting, the growth of per capita income is simply the sum of 2 factors: growth in labor force population relative to total population, or the so-called the support ratio, and 2, the growth in labor productivity. Thus, we can decompose the demographic dividend into One, the short term, a growing, young, vibrant, and educated workforce. And two, the long-term increases in overall productivity from capital accumulation and human development. In a recent paper by the UNFPA, the authors, and I think one of the authors is Mike Abrigo of PIDS, they estimate that the rising support ratio may increase the growth of the Philippine economy by a range of 0.4 to 0.7 percentage points until the 2040s, while increased overall productivity would add another 0.1 to 0.7 percentage points to growth in the longer term. In total, this so-called demographic sweet spot could contribute at least 1 percentage point increase to the country's growth potential or prospects for the next 2 to 3 decades. That is, if we can address the pandemic's profound, scaring effects on learning and skills formation, improve labor market conditions, and ramp up the employment-creating investments I mentioned earlier. We cannot afford to miss out once again while our East Asian counterparts were able to take advantage of this window of opportunity. Despite the improvements that we have observed in terms of raising our growth prospects, lingering structural issues have resulted in mixed outcomes for welfare, household welfare in particular. For one, we observed a rate of poverty reduction that could have been more rapid had we more decisively addressed such issues. From a share of 44% in 2000 to 25% in 2019, poverty incidence fell. But we can see that we could have done much more. In the same period, for example, Vietnam reduced its poverty levels from 65% in 2000 to only 4.2% in 2019. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic had a much higher impact on poverty in the Philippines than its Asian counterparts. Our low labor productivity has also limited wage growth, resulting in the weak response of poverty reduction to growth. Between 2012 and 2021, we had one of the lowest average wages in the region. The purchasing power afforded by these wages is also threatened by transitory challenges such as inflation. For 18 consecutive months, the headline inflation rate has been above government targets. High inflation has diminished consumption expenditure, especially for poor and vulnerable households. It has also increased pressure to raise interest rates, which could have dampened private sector appetite for investment and expansion. Food inflation was one of the key contributors to high inflation. This was driven by rising world prices of essential agricultural commodities and inputs, and domestic factors such as restrictive policies for importation, the spread of animal diseases, alleged anti-competitive conduct, and logistical constraints along the supply chain. By the way, by this time, the new inflation number should have already come out. It's down from 6.1 in September to 4.9 in October this year. So that's at least a good development. To be sure, external headwinds were not the only contributing factor. Our East Asian counterparts have been able to manage the impact of external supply shocks on prices and much better than we have. We must be able to address both the domestic and external supply shocks while alleviating the effects of inflation on the welfare of our poorest households. This state of our affairs cannot continue. In the previous decades, much talk was about how the 21st century will be the so-called Asian century, with the region's increasing dominance in the global economy. However, as the country that took the most considerable economic setback due to the pandemic, we must prevent the Philippines from being left out of this bright future. We cannot therefore afford to remain a laggard in a highly dynamic, rapidly growing region. We need to reshape our future actively. This is where the AmBisyon Natin 2040 of a matatag, maginhawa, at panatag na buhay for all Filipinos continues to remain relevant. This AmBisyon Natin 2040 was crafted during the time of President Aquino. It was adopted by President Duterte as its platform for its PDP, and it's also adopted by the current administration as an anchor for the PDP 2023 to 2028. So we need more administrations to keep this vision running. Translating these aspirations into measurable indicators results in a level of income per capita that's comparable to those attained by what we call high-income economies. Working and calculating backward, we can identify various growth scenarios of the economy, corresponding to a timeline for when such a vision will likely be attained. The country must grow rapidly, which must be sustained 6.5% to 8% a year for at least the next 2 decades. To achieve the AmBisyon Natin 2040, the government has created roadmaps or medium-term Philippine Development Plans or PDPs, the country's development blueprints formulated under every administration. I mentioned earlier, 3 administrations now. The PDP 2023 to 2028 of the Marcos administration bears the strategies, programs, and legislative priorities that must be undertaken, implemented, or passed to realize the targets and outcomes. The PDP sets ambitious targets. It aims for nothing less than economic transformation, intending to create a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. Looking at where we are in 2023, we acknowledge that much remains to be done to achieve our short and medium-term targets. Achieving the AmBisyon Natin 2040 and the PDP targets would involve not just addressing the transitory challenges today, but also the chronic structural issues that have long since limited the growth of the Philippine economy. Though it will take some time for results to materialize, and more importantly, sustain the progress, I am pleased to share some of the efforts we have undertaken. First, to address the chronic low savings and investments in the Philippine economy, we're creating a more enabling regulatory and policy environment to incentivize domestic, private, and foreign direct investments. The following measures, flashed on the screen, have been passed in Congress, both recently and in the previous administration. And the executive branch has implemented other critical reform and policy initiatives. These initiatives aim to make the Philippines an attractive destination for investors. We expect significant investments in various sectors to drive the country's sustained growth. I am also pleased to share that we have revamped the governing frameworks for high-impact public-private partnerships, or PPPs, in the investment ecosystem. The revised 2022 implementing rules and regulations of the BOT law addresses various concerns from private sector stakeholders regarding financial viability and implementation ambiguity. The upcoming amendment to the BOT law, or the PPP code, reflects the features of the revised IRR and shall be a landmark piece of legislation for this administration. It aims to harmonize all legal, policy, and regulatory frameworks in developing, implementing, and monitoring PPP projects focusing on balancing public and private sector objectives. Additionally, the Investment Coordination Committee guidelines for PPP projects outline the approval process for these projects. The last item on the screen, on the list on the screen, is the 2023 revised NEDA joint venture guidelines, which aim to ensure the full participation of our partners in the joint construction and operation of infrastructure projects. The Office of the President is finalizing the executive order and expediting the processing of documentary requirements for the infrastructure flagship projects, or IFPs. The EO aims to simplify the requirements and clearances needed by implementing agencies for priority infrastructure projects. It also ensures the automatic approval of any pending application or request, provided all conditions and payments have been fully complied with. These efforts seek to minimize or remove the bureaucratic delay that has stalled our infrastructure projects in the past. As you can see, with the limited fiscal space, private sector participation in implementing and formulating PPPs will remain critical for physical and social infrastructure. As of October 6, 105 profitable PPP projects are in the pipeline, with approximately 2.5 trillion pesos or $45 billion US. Most are in the transport, road, and property development sectors. Other PPP opportunities in social infrastructure include health, solid waste management, and water and sanitation. We have demonstrated our commitment to turning crucial IFP and PPP projects into reality through our regular NEDA board meetings, which are now held at least once a month. The President chairs the NEDA board, with the NEDA Secretary serving as the Vice Chair. Under the Marcos administration, the average processing period for the following PPP projects were 40 days, half of the prescribed maximum working day processing period. We have already approved 5 PPP projects, including the much talked about Ninoy Aquino International Airport, the Tarlac-Pangasinan-La Union Expressway extension, bringing the expressway from Rosario, La Union, all the way to San Juan, La Union, and eventually to the Vigan. And the newly, and some projects have also gone, in the social sector have also been approval along the same line. The timely approval of these PPP projects highlights the effectiveness of our reforms and our institution's commitment to driving the administration's socioeconomic agenda. We're partnering with the private sector to continue realizing these high-impact projects. The next generation of reforms will cover critical areas and sectors such as telecommunications, energy, mining, procurement, land use, and fiscal incentives. These reforms will build on our hard-won gains and initiatives, enabling the transformation of our economic sectors and ensuring sustained inclusive growth. These upcoming reforms aim to facilitate more significant investment, enhance efficiency and productivity, and promote private sector activity in our economy. Admittedly, we should have made such reforms decades ago. While we are certainly feeling the effects of our neglect, there is no other way but to make the difficult choices and put in the work now. We must take 2, even 3 steps forward, even as other forces, populism and political expediency, take us 1 step backward. Therefore, to end my presentation, please allow me to pose some issues for our discussions in the spirit of all of society approach to achieving our desired future. We know that to compete globally in the modern age, we must find ways to harness fast-evolving technologies as opportunities are waiting to be tapped by our young labor force. Therefore, we need to know what skills are demanded by our industries and growth drivers, and what competencies are our educational systems supplying. Given the technological changes, could services-oriented growth lead to sustained and inclusive economic development? What institutional reforms must be enacted to help our educational systems adapt to the modern needs of our students? We need to align and synergize efforts with the private sector or industry. What is holding back collaboration with the private sector? And what are the low-hanging fruits? Why can't we seem to make it work, while many others, our neighbors in Asia especially, have deployed it with immense success? How can we minimize skills mismatch in the labor industry or labor market? We recognize that business as usual is no longer acceptable. We must enact fundamental institutional reforms. How can we create a competitive regulatory environment that fosters the necessary foreign direct investments that would supplement our low savings? How should we manage the transitory challenges of high inflation and fiscal deficits that could limit our short-term and medium-term economic development? Again, obtaining the answer to such questions is not simply the government's role. As a former academic, I welcome numerous perspectives. We at NEDA believe in pursuing a whole-of-society and coordinated approach to solving the many issues our country faces as we work towards realizing a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. And so, once again, thank you for all this opportunity to talk about my views on transforming the Philippine economy, and I look forward to the engaging and fruitful discussions at this conference. Thank you and good morning to all.
Thank you, Secretary Balisacan, for sharing with us our current status, where we would like to head, and for sharing with us how you view how we should get there, as well as the importance of working together, cooperation to be able to achieve that. Now, to formally thank Secretary Balisacan, let me call again on stage Dr. Tuanyo and Dr. Cuevas to give the certificate and token of appreciation.